The smell of cheap bleach couldn't hide the copper taste of blood filling my mouth. 29 years old, and I was crumpled on the linoleum of a rented RV bathroom while my stepmother checked her knuckles. She thought a split lip would silence me about the offshore accounts. Wrong. As the engine vibrated, I smeared blood onto a folded receipt and shoved it behind the toilet panel. This wasn't a family trip anymore. It was a crime scene. My name is Charlie Ellison, and I am 29 years old. I spent 6 years as a cybersecurity specialist for the United States Air Force, and currently, I serve as the Director of Systems Security for Northline Vector Systems, a defense contractor that handles data sensitive enough to start or end wars. I have been trained to resist interrogation. I have been trained to withstand sleep deprivation, psychological pressure, and physical duress. Yet, here I was, crumpled on the linoleum floor of a rented recreational vehicle, tasting the metallic tang of my own blood mixed with the chemical sting of cheap lavender air freshener. The bathroom was a claustrophobic box, barely 3 feet by 4 feet, vibrating violently with the hum of the engine beneath us. We were somewhere on the interstate, headed west, trapped in a rolling tin can meant for a family bonding trip my father had christened the Reconciliation Tour. There was no reconciliation here. There was only the stinging heat radiating across my left cheekbone and the cold, terrifying realization that the woman standing over me had finally stopped pretending. Lydia Ellison, my stepmother, the chief financial officer of Ellison Strategic Logistics. She stood with her back pressed against the flimsy plywood door, her chest heaving beneath a silk blouse that cost more than the average American mortgage payment. Her manicure was perfect, a soft blush pink that looked grotesque against the context of her clenched fist. "You think you are so smart," Lydia hissed, her voice a low vibration that barely rose above the rattle of the exhaust fan. "You think because you went off to the military and got a fancy title at Northline that you can come back here and audit me?" I pushed myself up on one elbow, wiping my mouth with the back of my hand. It came away red. I looked at it, then up at her. I did not scream. I did not cry. I fell back on the training that told me to assess the threat and secure the asset. In this case, the asset was the truth, and the threat was the woman who had systematically hollowed out my father's company from the inside out. "I know about the offshore accounts in the Caymans." "Lydia," I said, my voice steady despite the throbbing in my jaw. "I know about the 3 shell companies. I know you forged Dad's signature on the Ironcrest vendor contracts last week. I saw the logs." The reaction was instantaneous. It wasn't the reaction of a mother, or even a wicked stepmother from a fairy tale. It was the reaction of a criminal cornered. She lunged, her hand, adorned with the 2-carat diamond ring my father had bought her for their 10th anniversary, connected with the side of my head. It was an open-handed slap that turned into a shove. My head snapped back, colliding hard with the edge of the faux marble sink. The sound was a sickening crack, loud enough that I thought for a second my skull had given way. Pain exploded behind my eyes, white and blinding. I slid down the wall, the smell of bleach from the toilet bowl rushing up to meet me. The world tilted. The RV hit a pothole, and I was thrown against the shower stall door. This was violence. Raw, unadulterated violence inflicted on a grown woman by another grown woman. There were no children here to witness it. Just the hum of the tires on the asphalt and the drip, drip, drip of the faucet I had jarred loose. Lydia knelt, grabbing my chin with fingers that felt like steel talons. She forced my face up to hers. Her eyes were devoid of panic now. They were cold, calculating pools of blue ice. "Listen to me, Charlie," she whispered, her breath smelling of mints and coffee. "If you say one word to your father, if you show him one single spreadsheet or log file, I will bury you. I will not just ruin your relationship with him, I will ruin you. I will make sure Northline knows their security director is mentally unstable. I will have your security clearance revoked before you can blink. You will lose your career. You will lose your reputation. You will have nothing." I stared at her. My training screamed at me to fight back, to subdue the aggressor. I knew 3 different ways to break her wrist from this position. But I didn't. Instead, I swallowed the blood pooling in my cheek. I let my eyes go wide and watery. I let my shoulders slump in a performance of defeat. I needed her to believe she had won. I needed her to believe that violence was an effective tool against me. "Okay," I choked out, the word bubbling through the red liquid in my mouth. "Okay, stop, please," Lydia sneered, a look of pure triumph crossing her face. She released my chin, wiping her hand on her designer jeans as if I were something filthy she had accidentally touched. "Clean yourself up," she commanded. "We are stopping for gas in 2 miles. If you look like a victim when you come out of here, I will make sure your father thinks you are having another one of your PTSD episodes." She unlocked the door and stepped out, the rush of cool air from the cabin hitting my face. I heard her voice change instantly, pitching up an octave into that sweet, concerned tone she used for my father. "Kenny, honey, I think Charlie is feeling a little carsick. She's going to stay in there for a bit." I heard my father's grunt of affirmation from the driver's seat. The RV began to decelerate. The moment the lock clicked shut, the tears I had been holding back evaporated. The pain in my cheek was a sharp, pulsing reminder of reality, but my mind was already racing, calculating, executing Plan Echo. I had roughly 5 minutes. I pulled myself up, gripping the edge of the sink. My reflection in the mirror was a disaster. My lip was split, bleeding freely. A dark bruise was already blooming across my cheekbone like a storm cloud. I looked at the blood on my hand, bright, oxygenated red. The RV groaned to a halt. I heard the hiss of the air brakes. I heard the main door open. "I will go get the snacks, Kenny," Lydia called out. "You check the tires." They were outside. I was alone. I scrambled for the toilet paper, ripping off a chunk to dab at my lip. But then I stopped. I reached into the back pocket of my jeans and pulled out a folded receipt from a diner we had stopped at 40 miles back. It was blank on the back. My hands were shaking, adrenaline dumping into my system, but my mind was crystal clear. I needed a pen. I patted my pockets. Nothing. I looked around the tiny bathroom. Nothing. I looked at the blood on my fingers. It would have to do. It was better. Actually, it was visceral. It was undeniable. I used my own blood as ink. It was messy, and I had to reopen the cut on my lip to get enough for the last few words. But the message was legible. Dad. Lydia beat me. She knows I found the Ironcrest logs. I am not safe. If you are reading this, the secrets aren't in the RV anymore. Below that, I wrote a string of characters, a password, and a URL. Evidence access code, Echo November 7-2. Make a choice, protect the truth, or die with her secrets. I folded the paper. The blood was tacky, drying fast in the dry air of the air conditioning. I needed a hiding place. My eyes darted around the cramped space. Under the sink? Too obvious. The trash? Too risky. My eyes landed on the wall behind the toilet. There was a small plastic access panel, roughly 6 inches square, meant for servicing the water lines. It was flush with the wall, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. I jammed my fingernails into the seam. It was stiff, painted over with cheap beige paint. I gritted my teeth, ignoring the pounding in my head, and pried, with a soft pop. One corner gave way. I slid the folded note inside, pushing it deep enough that it wouldn't fall out from the vibration, but close enough that if someone were to open the panel, say, if the flush mechanism jammed, which I knew it often did on these rental units, it would tumble right out. I snapped the panel back into place just as I heard heavy footsteps on the metal stairs outside. "All good on the tires, Lydia," my father shouted. I turned to the sink, splashing cold water on my face, watching the pink swirl down the drain. I couldn't hide the swelling, but I could clean away the blood. I took a deep breath, staring at my own eyes in the mirror. They looked harder than they had 10 minutes ago. When I opened the bathroom door, the cabin was silent. My father was back in the driver's seat, adjusting the mirrors. He looked back, his eyes widening as he saw my face. "Charlie? Good Lord, honey, what happened?" Lydia was just coming through the main door, a bag of chips in her hand. She froze, her eyes narrowing, daring me to speak. I walked to the dinette table and sat down, wincing as the movement jarred my head. "I fell," I said, my voice raspy. "When you braked for the exit, I lost my balance and smashed my face into the edge of the sink." It was a weak lie, a pathetic lie. Any father paying attention would have seen the finger marks that were faintly visible on my jaw. But Kenneth Ellison was a man who had spent the last decade perfecting the art of not seeing what he didn't want to see. He let out a breath, his shoulders dropping, relieved. He was relieved it was an accident, relieved he didn't have to referee a fight, relieved he didn't have to ask why his wife looked like she had just gone 12 rounds in a boxing ring. "You need to be more careful," he said, turning back to the steering wheel. "These things ride rough." "I know, Dad," I said quietly. "I know." Lydia walked past me, the scent of her expensive perfume washing over me. She placed a hand on my shoulder, squeezing just hard enough to hurt. "Poor thing," she cooed, loud enough for Dad to hear. "Do you want some ice?" "No," I said. "I just want to sleep." The engine roared to life. We merged back onto the highway, the world outside blurring into streaks of gray and black as night began to fall. I climbed into the overhead bunk above the cab, pulling the curtain shut. I lay there in the dark, listening to the hum of the tires. Lydia was in the passenger seat, chatting animatedly about the landscape, about the dinner plans for tomorrow, about the future of the company. She sounded happy. She thought she had broken me. She thought fear had done its job. I rolled onto my side and looked at the rear-view mirror mounted on the windshield. From my angle, I could just see my father's eyes reflected in the glass. He looked tired. He looked old. He kept glancing at the bathroom door, then quickly looking away, guilt flickering across his features like a shadow. He didn't know that the bomb wasn't in the offshore accounts or the fake contracts anymore. The bomb was a piece of receipt paper with his daughter's blood on it, sitting inches away from the plumbing he constantly complained about. We drove for 4 hours, 200 miles of silence from me, and 200 miles of lies from Lydia. At a rest stop just outside the state line, nature finally called. "I need to use the head," Dad grumbled, pulling the massive vehicle into a truck parking lane. I lay perfectly still in the bunk, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I heard him get up. I heard the heavy thud of his boots on the floor. I heard the bathroom door open and click shut. I counted the seconds. 1, 2, 3. I heard the distinctive sound of the flush mechanism engaging, followed by the familiar, annoying gurgle of a stuck valve. "Damn thing," I heard him mutter through the thin walls. Then, the sound of plastic scraping against plastic. He was prying the access panel to jiggle the handle, just like he had done 3 times yesterday. Silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. It lasted for 10 seconds, then 20. The water was still running, but he wasn't moving. 200 miles away, Lydia had struck me, but right here, in the dark of a highway rest stop, the blow had finally landed on him. The receipt had fallen, the blood was dry, but the truth was wet and fresh, and it was staring Kenneth Ellison right in the face. To understand why a grown woman would let herself be beaten in a recreational vehicle bathroom, you have to understand the slow, corrosive rot that had taken hold of my family long before we ever rented that Winnebago. The violence didn't start with a fist, it started with a signature. I grew up in Brighton Falls, Colorado, a town that smelled like pine needles and diesel fuel. My father, Kenneth Ellison, was a legend in his own small way. He was a former logistics officer who could move a convoy through a sandstorm without losing a single bolt. When he founded Ellison Strategic Logistics, it wasn't about getting rich. It was about precision. It was about honor. I remember sitting on his knee while he explained supply chains to me, his voice rough with pride. He used to tell me that a contract was a promise, and you never broke a promise to the men and women serving on the line. That version of my father died slowly, piece by piece, starting the day my mother passed away from ovarian cancer when I was 15 years old. Grief makes people vulnerable, and it makes businesses bleed. For 2 years, Dad was a ghost. He forgot to invoice clients. He missed compliance deadlines. The sharks were circling, waiting for Ellison Strategic Logistics to go under, until Lydia walked in. Lydia wasn't warm. She didn't bake cookies or try to replace the softness my mother had brought to our home. She was a forensic accountant with a smile like a razor blade and a mind that worked in profit margins. She stepped in, took over the books, and pulled the company back from the brink of bankruptcy. Dad didn't fall in love with her because she was kind. He fell in love with her because she made him feel safe. She stopped the bleeding. By the time I graduated high school, they were married, and Lydia was the CFO. I ran away from the new dynamic by running toward the structure I understood best. I enlisted in the Air Force for 6 years. I lived in a world of absolute clarity. In cybersecurity, things are binary. A network is secure, or it is compromised. A user is authorized, or they are a threat. There is no gray area in a firewall log. I thrived on that discipline. I built a reputation for hunting down vulnerabilities and patching them before the enemy could exploit them. But while I was away guarding digital borders for the government, Lydia was back home redrawing the borders of my family. When I left the service and took the job at Northline Vector Systems, I came back to Brighton Falls with the intention of reconnecting. I wanted to bridge the gap. That was my first mistake. My second mistake was agreeing to help Dad with a casual security audit of his company's internal network. "Just take a look, Charlie," he had said over a Sunday dinner, looking everywhere but at me. "Lydia says our IT costs are ballooning. Maybe you can find some fat to trim." It was supposed to be a weekend favor. I sat in the server room of the building I had grown up playing hide-and-seek in, sipping cold coffee and scrolling through access logs. It started with small things, inconsistencies that most people would write off as glitches, timestamps that didn't match user activity, login attempts from IP addresses that resolved to non-existent servers. My military brain didn't see glitches, it saw patterns. I started digging deeper. I wasn't looking for fraud. I was looking for malware. I thought they had been hacked. Then I found Ironcrest Distribution. It looked legitimate on the surface. Ironcrest was listed as a third-party vendor providing specialized packaging materials for sensitive electronics. There were invoices, dozens of them, totaling nearly $200,000 over the last fiscal quarter alone. But when I cross-referenced the shipping manifests with the inventory logs, I found a hole the size of a cargo plane. The packaging materials never arrived. There were no intake scans, no warehouse slotting assignments, no usage reports. The money went out to Ironcrest, sat there for 48 hours, and then vanished. I didn't stop there. I traced the ownership of Ironcrest Distribution. It was buried under layers of LLCs, registered in Delaware, then Nevada, then bouncing through a holding company in the Caribbean. But digital footprints are harder to erase than paper ones. I found a recovery email address linked to the administrative account of the holding company. M. Ellison. Consulting@gmail.com. I stared at the screen until the pixels blurred. Maya Ellison, my half-sister. Maya was 23 years old. She was sweet, vapid, and entirely uninterested in business. She worked at the company as an executive assistant, which mostly involved ordering catering for meetings and choosing the office holiday decorations. Maya couldn't balance a checkbook, let alone run a complex shell company for laundering defense contract money. Lydia had put the shell company in her own daughter's name. I felt a cold rage settle in my gut, heavier and Charlie than anything I had felt in active duty. This wasn't just theft. This was a setup. If the Department of Defense ever audited Ellison Strategic Logistics, Lydia wouldn't be the one in handcuffs. It would be Maya. I printed everything. I didn't save it to the company server. I saved it to an encrypted drive in my pocket. The confrontation happened 2 days later in Dad's home office. The room smelled of expensive leather and the scotch he had started drinking earlier and earlier in the day. I laid the papers out on his mahogany desk. The Ironcrest invoices, the lack of inventory, the link to Maya. "Explain this," I said. My voice was calm, the voice of an officer debriefing a catastrophic failure. Lydia didn't flinch. She sat in the wingback chair, sipping her wine, looking at the documents with an expression of mild boredom. "It is called tax optimization. Charlie," she said, waving a hand dismissively. "We move capital to reduce liability. It is standard practice in the private sector. You have been in the government too long. You have forgotten how real business works." "This isn't business," I snapped, turning to my father. "Dad, look at this. She is billing the government for goods that don't exist. That is fraud. That is federal prison. And she put it in Maya's name." I waited for the explosion. I waited for the man who taught me about honor to stand up, to slam his fist on the table, to kick her out. Kenneth Ellison sat there, staring at the condensation on his glass. He looked small. He looked defeated. "Charlie," he said softly, and the weakness in his voice broke my heart. "The margins are thin right now. The economy is rough. Lydia, she gets creative sometimes. She saved this company. We owe her a little latitude." "Latitude?" I asked, incredulous. "Dad, she is using your daughter as a human shield for embezzlement." He finally looked at me, and his eyes were pleading. "The world is more complicated than the regulations in the Air Force manual. Honey, do not be so rigid. You do not understand the pressure we are under." That was the moment the knife twisted. It wasn't that he didn't know. It was that he knew. And he had chosen comfort over character. He had chosen the woman who kept the lights on over the daughter who wanted to keep his soul clean. "Do not dig any deeper, Charlie," he added, a warning tone creeping into his voice. "You will only drag the whole house down. Just let it be." I gathered the papers from the desk. I didn't say another word. I walked out of that office, past a confused Maya who was watching TikTok videos on the couch, and out into the cool Colorado night. They thought I had given up. They thought the conversation was over. But they didn't know who I was anymore. They saw a daughter. They didn't see the director of systems security. They didn't know that silence is a tactic. That night, back in my apartment, I didn't sleep. I started Plan Echo. I set up the remote mirroring protocols. I started diverting copies of every single email that passed through Lydia's desktop to a secure server in Iceland. I built a digital cage, bar by bar, monitoring every dollar that moved, every fake invoice that was generated. I watched them for 3 months. I watched Lydia get bolder. I watched my father get sadder. I watched Maya remain blissfully ignorant of the target painted on her back. When Dad suggested the RV trip, the reconciliation tour, I knew it was a trap, or maybe it was a test. Maybe Lydia wanted to see if I had really let it go. Maybe Dad wanted to convince himself we could still be a happy family despite the rot beneath the floorboards. I agreed to go, not to reconcile, but because I needed one final piece of evidence. I needed a confession, or an action so undeniable that Dad couldn't look away anymore. I walked into that RV knowing exactly what kind of woman Lydia was. I knew she was dangerous, but I also knew that people who are used to getting away with everything eventually make a mistake when they feel threatened. I just didn't realize that her mistake would be underestimating how much pain I was willing to take to bring her down. The bruise forming on my face in the bathroom wasn't a tragedy. It was the final variable in an equation I had been solving since that night in the study. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, matching the endless, hypnotic dashed lines of the interstate. 200 miles. We had driven 200 miles since the stop where Charlie had supposedly fallen in the bathroom. 200 miles of silence from the bunk above my head, and 200 miles of relentless, nervous chatter from Lydia in the passenger seat. I needed to stop. The air in the cab was too thick, recycled and stale, smelling of Lydia's vanilla perfume and the unspoken tension that was tightening around my throat like a noose. "I need a break," I muttered, signaling for the next rest area. Lydia looked up from her iPad, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. "We are behind schedule. Kenneth, if we don't make it to Utah by tonight, we lose the reservation." "I don't care about the reservation." "Lydia," I snapped, the sharpness of my own voice surprising me. "I need to walk. I need to use the restroom." She sighed, a sound of performative patience, and went back to scrolling. "Fine, Make it quick." I pulled the 40-foot beast of a vehicle into a dark corner of the rest stop, away from the floodlights and the other truckers. The engine died with a shudder. I sat there for a moment, listening to the ticking of the cooling metal. Charlie was still quiet in the overhead bunk. Too quiet. My daughter was a light sleeper. She always had been. The fact that she hadn't moved meant she was either exhausted or she was pretending. I climbed out of the driver's seat, my knees popping. I walked past the bunk without looking up. I couldn't look up. If I saw the bruise on her face again, the one she said was an accident, I might have to acknowledge the sick feeling in my gut that said it wasn't. I stepped into the bathroom and locked the door. The space was cramped, smelling faintly of chemicals and something metallic. I washed my hands, scrubbing them under the cold trickle of water, trying to wash away the feeling of the steering wheel, the feeling of compliance. The vibration of the road was still humming in my legs. I turned to flush the toilet, and the handle stuck. Again, it was a cheap rental, and the mechanism had been jamming since Nebraska. I jiggled it, but it wouldn't seat properly. Frustrated, I knelt down. The waterline access panel behind the toilet was loose, vibrating against the wall. It was just one more thing falling apart in this vehicle. I jammed my thumb into the seam to snap it back into place, but I pushed too hard. The plastic rectangle popped off and clattered onto the linoleum. And then, something else fell out. It was a small, folded piece of paper. It fluttered down and landed near my boot. I stared at it. It wasn't trash. It was folded with intention. I reached down and picked it up. The texture was rough, receipt paper, but it was what was on it that made my breath hitch in my throat. There was a smear of reddish-brown on the outside. Dried blood. My heart hammered against my ribs. A sudden, violent rhythm. I knew that blood. I had seen it on Charlie's lip earlier. I unfolded the paper, my hands trembling so bad I almost dropped it. "Dad, if you read this, I have decided not to save you anymore." The words were written in a jagged, dark scrawl. The ink wasn't ink. It was blood. My daughter had written this with her own blood. I sat down heavily on the closed toilet lid, the air leaving my lungs. I read on. Iron Crest Distribution. Vendor ID 884, Bravo. The offshore routing number ending in 492. I know about the timestamp manipulation on the server logs from last Tuesday. I felt the blood drain from my face. These weren't vague accusations. These were specifics. These were the exact data points Lydia and I had discussed in hushed tones in our bedroom. The details we thought were buried under layers of encryption and corporate bureaucracy. Charlie didn't just suspect something. She had the keys to the castle. I continued reading, the nausea rising in my throat. I have uploaded the full evidence package to a dead man's switch server. Passcode, Echo November 72. If I don't check in every 12 hours, or if something happens to me, the link goes to a third party, a federal third party. Make a choice, protect the truth, or die with her secrets. The world tilted. For years, I had told myself I was protecting Charlie by keeping her out of the business. I told myself I was protecting the company, my legacy, by letting Lydia cut corners. I had convinced myself that Lydia's creative accounting was a necessary evil to keep us afloat, to keep the payroll going, to keep the family comfortable. But looking at this blood-stained receipt, the lie disintegrated. This wasn't accounting. This was war, and my wife had declared it on my daughter inside this very room, probably while I was driving, oblivious and useless in the front seat. "Kenneth!" Lydia's voice muffled through the door, sharp and demanding. "What are you doing in there? We need to get moving." "Dad?" Maya's voice joined in, lighter, curious. "Is everything okay? You have been in there a while." Panic seized me. If I walked out with this paper, Lydia would see it on my face. She would know. And if she knew Charlie had this leverage, God help us, I didn't know what she would do. I had seen Lydia destroy competitors with a smile. I had seen her ruin employees' lives over a misplaced decimal point. But violence? Physical violence? I looked at the blood on the paper again. Yes, she was capable of that too. I had a choice. I could flush the note, I could wash my hands, walk out, and pretend I never saw it. I could continue the charade, drive us to Utah, and let Lydia handle whatever storm was coming. That was the coward's way. That was the Kenneth Ellison way of the last 5 years. But then I looked at the words again, or die with her secrets. Charlie wasn't asking for help. She was offering me a lifeline. She was telling me the ship was sinking and giving me one last chance to grab a life vest. I didn't flush it. I pulled out my wallet. My hands were shaking, but my movements were deliberate. I folded the receipt carefully, placing it behind my driver's license, deep in the leather pocket where Lydia never looked. Then, I took out my phone. I snapped a picture of the note, ensuring the text was legible. I opened a browser window in incognito mode and logged into a Proton Mail account. User: K. Ellison. Archive. I had created this account 3 years ago, on a night when Lydia had asked me to sign a stack of documents without reading them. I had signed them because I was weak, but that night I had made a digital backup of my own fears. I had never used it, until now. I attached the photo and sent it to myself. Subject line: insurance. I stood up, flushed the toilet to keep up the ruse, and fixed the plastic panel. It snapped back on with a finality that echoed in the small room. I looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes looked haunted, rimmed with red, but there was something else there too. A spark of anger. A spark of the man who used to command logic, not just sign checks. I unlocked the door and stepped out. Lydia was standing in the kitchenette, arms crossed, tapping her foot. Maya was sitting at the table, scrolling on her phone. "Finally," Lydia huffed. "Did you fall in?" "Stomach issue," I lied, my voice flat. Must have been the diner food. I walked past her. I didn't touch her. I didn't meet her eyes. I went straight to the driver's seat. I glanced in the rearview mirror. The curtain to the overhead bunk was slightly parted. Charlie was there, eyes closed, her breathing rhythmic, but the angle of the street lamp outside cast a harsh light on her face. The bruise on her cheek was dark purple now, ugly and undeniable. "I am sorry," I whispered. The sound was so soft it was swallowed by the hum of the refrigerator. I started the engine. "Okay," Lydia said, strapping herself in. "GPS says if we push it, we can make the campground by 11. I put the RV in gear, but when we reached the highway interchange, I didn't turn west toward the interstate. I turned north. "Kenneth?" Lydia looked up, her brow furrowing. "Where are you going?" "The GPS says right." "Traffic," I said. The lie came easier this time. "The radio said there is a pileup near the canyon. I am taking the scenic route. It adds 40 minutes but keeps us moving." "I didn't hear anything on the radio," Lydia said, her voice tightening. She stared at me, her eyes narrowing, analyzing my profile. She was sniffing the air, sensing the change in pheromones. She knew something was off. She knew I never deviated from the plan. "It was on the CB," I said, keeping my eyes fixed on the dark road ahead. "Trust me." The tension in the cabin spiked. It was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest. Lydia didn't say another word, but I could feel her staring at me. She was calculating. She was wondering why her obedient soldier was suddenly improvising. We drove into the night. The scenic route was winding and empty. Every mile felt like a countdown. Hours later, we pulled into a gravel lot off a secondary highway. It wasn't the luxury RV park Lydia had booked. It was a quiet, dark turnout surrounded by trees. "We are stopping here?" Lydia asked, disgust dripping from her voice. "I am too tired to drive the pass," I said. "We sleep here. We move in the morning." I climbed into the back, feigning exhaustion. Lydia and Maya took the main bedroom in the rear. Charlie stayed in the bunk. I lay on the convertible sofa in the main cabin, staring at the ceiling. The silence of the RV was deafening. I could hear Lydia's soft snoring from the back. I could hear the wind in the trees. I pulled my wallet out from under my pillow. I took out the note. I read it again by the dim light of the smoke detector LED. Echo November 7-2. She was prepared to burn it all down. My daughter, the one I thought I needed to protect from the world, was the only one who had actually prepared for the war. I thought about the accounts. I thought about Maya, innocent and oblivious, whose name was plastered on shell companies she didn't know existed. I thought about the bruise on Charlie's face. And I thought about Lydia, the woman who had saved me, only to enslave me. I sat up. My hand reached for my phone. It was 2 a.m. I knew the number Charlie had mentioned in her story about her time in the service. She had talked about an office that handled contractor fraud. She had mentioned a specific department. I didn't call Lydia's lawyers. I didn't call my fixer. I dialed a number that started with a Washington, D.C. area code. It rang. Once, twice. Office of Special Investigations, automated tip line. A robotic voice answered. If this is an emergency... I hung up before the beep. My heart was racing so fast, I thought I might have a heart attack right there on the fold-out sofa. I didn't leave a message, not yet, but I had dialed. I had broken the seal. The log was on my phone now. A call to federal investigations at 2 a.m. I looked at the bathroom door. The distance between me and the truth had been 200 miles. Now, it was 0. I lay back down, clutching the note in my hand like a weapon. The RV was stationary, but I knew, with terrifying certainty, that we were hurtling towards a cliff, and for the first time in years, I wasn't going to hit the brakes. The silence in the bunk above the driver's cabin was absolute, save for the rhythmic breathing of the people who thought they were still in charge. My cheek throbbed with a dull, heavy heat, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. Every time the RV shifted over the uneven gravel of the turnout, the pain spiked, sharp and demanding. I did not reach up to soothe it. I did not search for an ice pack. In the cold calculus of Plan Echo, that bruise was not an injury, it was an asset. It was a physical manifest of Lydia's desperation, and by tomorrow morning, when the colors deepened from angry red to a sickly purple, it would be undeniable proof of a hostile witness environment. I lay on my back, staring at the beige fabric of the RV ceiling, and mentally checked off step 4 of the operation. Lydia thought the note in the bathroom was a desperate scribbling of a terrified victim. My father thought it was a plea for help. They were both wrong. That note, written in blood because the theatricality would force my father's hand, was the pivot point I had designed 3 months ago. This was not a reaction. This was an execution of a strategy I had built while sitting in the server rooms of Northline Vector Systems, drinking lukewarm coffee, and watching the digital ghost of my stepmother rob the United States government blind. Plan Echo began 18 weeks ago. I knew I couldn't just accuse Lydia. She was too smart, and her paper trail was too convoluted. She had layers of plausible deniability woven into the corporate structure like Kevlar. If I went to the police with just a suspicion, she would have lawyers bury me before I filled out the first form. So, I became a ghost in my own family's network. I didn't hack Ellison's strategic logistics in the traditional sense. That would leave a forensic footprint that could be traced back to my Northline credentials. Instead, I exploited a legacy vulnerability in the email server my father had set up 10 years ago, a simple port mirroring protocol intended for IT troubleshooting. I commanded the router to send a blind carbon copy of every packet of data leaving Lydia's terminal directly to a private, encrypted server I had rented in Iceland. For months, I watched the traffic. I built a map. I saw the money leave the legitimate operating accounts. I saw it bounce through a vendor in Delaware called Iron Crest. I saw it split into 3 streams, moving through banks in Cyprus and Malta, before finally settling in the Caymans under a holding company managed by a firm that specialized in high-net-worth privacy. But data is boring. Juries get bored with spreadsheets. Prosecutors get bogged down in jurisdiction issues. I needed a narrative. I needed a crime that was visceral. That was why I contacted Agent Cole Harrison. Cole was a legend in the Defense Criminal Investigative Service. We had crossed paths 5 years ago when a supply sergeant in my unit tried to frame me for missing equipment. Cole was the investigator who cleared my name. He was a pit bull in a cheap suit, a man who hated contractor fraud more than he hated breathing smog. 6 weeks ago, I sent him an anonymous package. It contained no names, just a pattern analysis of the Ironcrest contracts and a teasing note. Someone is selling phantom inventory to the Department of Defense. Are you hungry? He had bitten. I knew he had. But he needed a witness. He needed someone on the inside to turn the key. I rolled over in the bunk, wincing as my ribs pressed against the mattress. I reached under my pillow and pulled out a burner phone, a cheap prepaid device I had bought with cash 3 towns over. I kept it powered down, battery removed, only assembling it when I knew everyone else was asleep. I booted it up. The screen glowed with a harsh blue light. I thought back to the moment I almost lost it all. It was a month ago. I was in the study at the main house, manually copying a physical ledger Lydia had foolishly left on her desk. The door had opened. Lydia stood there, a glass of Chardonnay in her hand, her eyes narrow. "What are you doing, Charlie?" she had asked, her voice silky with suspicion. My heart had stopped. I had the ledger open to the page detailing the payoffs to the procurement officer. If she looked down, I was dead. I didn't panic. I didn't slam the book shut. I laughed. I tapped the laptop I had brought with me. Dad asked me to check the firewall compatibility with the new Northline protocols. I lied, looking her dead in the eye. Your encryption is 10 years out of date, Lydia. If a Russian botnet wanted to get in here, they wouldn't even need a password. They would just walk in the front door. I played to her insecurity. I played to her fear of losing control. Her expression shifted from suspicion to annoyance. "Just fix it," she had snapped, "and do not bill us for the hours." She walked out. She never looked at the ledger. That was the night I knew I had to escalate. I knew that digital surveillance wasn't enough. I needed them to admit it. That was why I suggested the RV. Everyone thought the reconciliation tour was Dad's idea. It wasn't. I had planted the seed during a phone call 2 weeks ago, mentioning how much I missed our old camping trips, how I wanted to trap us all in a space where we couldn't run away from our issues. Dad, desperate for peace, took the bait. Lydia, confident she could dominate me in close quarters, agreed. They didn't know that an RV is an acoustic nightmare for secrets. Before we left the driveway in Brighton Falls, while Dad was loading the coolers and Lydia was complaining about the upholstery, I had slipped a high-fidelity listening device under the dashboard, taped securely behind the plastic casing of the heater vent. It was voice-activated. It had a battery life of 7 days. It had been recording for 48 hours. It caught Lydia berating Dad about the timeline. It caught her coaching Maya on what to say if anyone asked about her consulting role. And crucially, it caught the conversation they had while I was sleeping in the back yesterday afternoon. The one where Lydia explicitly mentioned that the audit needed to be stalled until the Ironcrest funds were fully washed. But the recording wasn't enough. I needed the violence. I knew Lydia. I knew that if I poked the right nerve, her pride, her control, her facade of perfection, she would snap. The bathroom confrontation was a calculated risk. I pushed her. I listed the crimes to her face. I practically dared her to hit me. When her fist connected with my face, it hurt. It hurt more than I expected. But as I slid down that wall, smelling the bleach and blood, I wasn't a victim. I was a trap springing shut. The note I left for Dad was the final nail. Bridge never built. It was a phrase from my childhood. Dad used to tell a story about a supply route during the First Gulf War. A contractor had claimed they built a bridge over a ravine, billed the government for it, and signed off on the safety inspection. When Dad's convoy arrived, there was nothing there, just empty air and a drop to the rocks below. "A bridge never built is worse than no bridge at all," he used to say, "because you trust it to hold your weight." By using that phrase in the note, I was telling him exactly what he was. He wasn't a bystander. He was the bridge that wasn't there. I was telling him that I knew he was hollow. I checked the burner phone. The signal was weak out here in the woods, but it was enough. If Dad had destroyed the note, if he had sided with Lydia completely, I still had the nuclear option. I had redundancy. Copy 1 was on the cloud server in Iceland. Copy 2 was on a solid-state drive sitting in the safe of Alan Kaplan, a retired JAG lawyer in Denver who owed me a favor. His instructions were clear. If I didn't call him by noon on Friday with a specific code word, he was to walk the drive over to the FBI field office personally. Copy 3 was a physical stack of papers, sealed in a waterproof envelope, sitting in a P.O. box in Grand Junction. Even if Lydia burned the house down and wiped the servers, paper persists. I saw a notification pop up on the screen, an encrypted message app I used to communicate with Cole. My pulse quickened. This was it. This was the moment the plan moved from theoretical to kinetic. The message was brief. Subject, Echo. Receive the sample package. Audio clarity on the dashboard bug is admissible. The pattern analysis holds water. I have authorization to move. If you are ready to burn it down, type Go. I will be in Brighton Falls in 4 hours. I can meet you on the route. I stared at the glowing letters. I will be in Brighton Falls. Cole wasn't just investigating anymore. He was hunting. I looked down from the bunk. The RV was dark. I could hear Dad shifting on the fold-out sofa. He was awake. I knew he was awake. He had the note. He had the truth in his hands. And it was eating him alive. I didn't feel pity. I felt a cold, hard satisfaction. I typed 2 letters into the phone. G-O. I hit send. The message vanished, replaced by a timestamp. I powered down the phone, slipped the battery out, and tucked it back under the mattress. Tomorrow, we would reach the campground. Tomorrow. Lydia would wake up thinking she just had to manage a sullen stepdaughter and a nervous husband. She would think the biggest problem was keeping up appearances for the neighbors. She had no idea that I had just authorized an airstrike on her life. I touched my cheek again. The swelling was significant. Good. Let them see it. Let the camera crews that would eventually come see it. Let the jury see it. I closed my eyes, but I didn't sleep. I lay there in the dark, listening to the wind, counting the miles Agent Cole Harrison was eating up on the highway, coming to meet us. The reconciliation tour was over. The extraction operation had begun. The morning sun hit the aluminum siding of the RV with a cheerful, blinding brightness that felt like an insult. We were parked in a premium spot at the Whispering Pines campground, surrounded by families frying eggs on portable stoves and retirees walking golden retrievers. It was the perfect American tableau, and right in the middle of it was Lydia, wearing a cashmere cardigan and flipping pancakes on the outdoor griddle like she was auditioning for a cooking show. My face felt like it was throbbing in time with the chirping birds. I hadn't looked in a mirror yet, but I could feel the heat radiating from my left cheek. It was stiff, swollen, and undoubtedly a horrific shade of violet. "Breakfast is ready," Lydia called out, her voice bright and projected just loud enough for the neighbors in the airstream next door to hear. "Charlie, honey, come eat something. You need your strength." I stepped out of the RV. The moment I cleared the doorframe, the chatter at the nearby picnic tables died down. I saw the woman in the airstream freeze, her coffee cup halfway to her mouth. They were looking at my face. Lydia didn't miss a beat. She hurried over, a look of practiced concern plastered on her features. "Oh, sweetie, that bruise looks nasty. I told you that bathroom door swings back hard if you don't latch it. Here, sit down." She reached out to touch my arm. I didn't flinch. I didn't pull away. I just looked at her, dead in the eye, and spoke loudly enough to cut through the smell of bacon and pine. "It wasn't a door. Lydia," I said, my voice calm but carrying. "And I don't think pancakes are going to fix the kind of contracts you have to beat your stepdaughter in a bathroom to keep hidden." Lydia stiffened. The spatula in her hand wavered. A drop of batter fell onto her expensive suede boot. "Charlie," she hissed through a frozen smile, her eyes darting to the neighbors. Low voice. "Now." "Why?" I asked, leaning against the picnic table. "Are we worried about the overhead? Or just the offshore accounts?" Maya, who had been coming around the corner with the campground dog she had befriended, stopped in her tracks. She looked from me to Lydia, sensing the sudden drop in barometric pressure. "Maya," I said, not taking my eyes off Lydia. "Go for a walk. Take the dog down to the lake. Dad and Lydia and I need to have a family meeting." "But I just got back," Maya started. "Go," I commanded. It was my officer voice. The one that didn't leave room for argument. Maya dropped the leash, looked at Dad, who was standing by the grill looking like a man facing a firing squad, and turned around, walking briskly toward the trail. "Inside," I said to Kenneth and Lydia. "Now." Lydia threw the spatula onto the tray with a clatter. She marched into the RV, Dad trailing behind her like a prisoner of war. I followed and locked the door behind me. I pulled the blinds shut, plunging the cabin into a dim, stifling twilight. "You ungrateful little brat." Lydia spun around, her face twisting from maternal concern to pure venom. "Do you have any idea who is parked next to us? That is a retired judge. If you embarrass this family—" "Sit down," I said. "Don't you order me around in my own—" "Sit down, Lydia." I slammed my hand on the dinette table. The sound cracked like a gunshot in the small space. She sat. Dad sat opposite her. I remained standing, blocking the door. The air conditioner hummed, but it did nothing to cool the heat in the room. "We are done pretending," I said. "I know about Ironcrest. I know about the 3 shell companies in Malta. I know you put Maya's name on the consulting firm that receives the kickbacks from the phantom inventory." Lydia let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. She crossed her arms, leaning back. "You found some old files and think you are Sherlock Holmes? You don't know the first thing about corporate finance. Charlie, you are a glorified IT support tech. Those are tax structures. They are legal." "They are laundering mechanisms," I corrected. "And I didn't just find files. I traced the packet data. I saw the login from your terminal at 3 a.m. last Tuesday, authorizing a transfer of $50,000 to an account that doesn't exist on the company ledger." Lydia's eyes narrowed. "You hacked my computer? That is a felony. Charlie, I could have you arrested right now. I could call Northline and tell them their security director is using company resources to spy on private citizens. You would lose your clearance before lunch." "I didn't hack you," I said softly. "I audited the network Dad asked me to secure, and I found a rat." I turned to my father. He was staring at the table, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were yellow. "Dad," I said, Tell her what you saw on the note." Lydia whipped her head toward him. "What note?" Kenneth looked up. He looked sick. "She knows. Lydia, she sent the data out. She has a failsafe." "She is bluffing," Lydia scoffed. "She wouldn't dare. She would destroy the company. She would destroy your legacy." "I already sent a draft to the Defense Criminal Investigative Service." I lied. It was a partial lie. I had sent the pattern analysis to Cole, but not the full raw data. But they didn't know that. "Agent Cole Harrison has the preliminary file. He is waiting for my signal to open the full archive." Lydia went pale. The name clearly meant something to her, or maybe just the reality of a federal agency getting involved was enough to pierce her armor. "You sent it?" she whispered. "You traitor. After everything I did, I saved this family. I saved your father from bankruptcy. We would be living in a trailer park if it wasn't for me." "You stole millions from the military," I said, "and you used Maya to do it." "We can fix this," Dad interrupted. His voice was shaking. "Charlie, listen, we can fix it. An internal solution. We sell the warehousing division. We liquidate the vacation home in Aspen. We pay back the Ironcrest account before the fiscal year closes. We can call it an accounting error. We hire a top legal team to self-report and mitigate." I looked at him, and for the first time, I saw him clearly. Not as the victim of a manipulative wife, but as a partner. "You want to pay it back?" I asked, feeling a cold weight settle in my chest. "With what money, Dad? The money you took as dividends?" I saw the personal withdrawals, too. "You didn't just look the other way, you spent it." Kenneth flinched as if I had slapped him. I had debts. Charlie, the medical bills from your mother, the market crash. It wasn't just greed." "It is fraud," I said, "and you are complicit." Lydia slammed her hand on the table. "Enough. You are not going to ruin us. You think you are so high and mighty with your morals? You are threatening your own sister. Charlie, if this goes public, Maya goes to jail. Her name is on the documents. Do you want to be the one who puts your baby sister in federal prison? You put her there, I shot back. When you forged her signature. She signed them, Lydia screamed. She signed every single one. She didn't read them, but she signed them. In the eyes of the law, she is the CEO of Ironcrest. If I go down, she goes down. Is that what you want? She was playing her ace. She knew Maya was my weak spot. She leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with manipulation. Think about the employees. Charlie, 300 people work at the logistics center. They have mortgages. They have kids. If the feds raid us, the contracts get pulled. The company folds. 300 families on the street. Because you wanted to play hero. I felt the walls of the RV closing in. The guilt was heavy. A suffocating blanket she knew exactly how to throw over me. Give me the drive, Lydia demanded, holding out her hand. Delete the cloud backups. We will pay you. We will set up a trust. You can go back to Northline and pretend this never happened. Or you can be the reason your sister rots in a cell and your father dies in prison. I looked at her hand. I looked at my father, who was watching me with a pathetic hope in his eyes. I took a deep breath. You think this is a negotiation, I said. It is a negotiation, Lydia said. Everyone has a price. You are right, I said. I raised my hand and pointed toward the front of the RV, specifically at the windshield. My price was the truth. They both turned to look. See that black plastic casing behind the rear-view mirror? I asked. The one you complained about, Lydia? The one you said was an ugly aftermarket backup camera sensor? Lydia frowned. What about it? It is not a camera, I said. It is a high-gain omnidirectional microphone with a 48-hour loop recording drive. It has been running since we left the driveway in Brighton Falls. The silence that followed was absolute. Lydia's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked at the mirror, then back at me, then back at the mirror. The color drained from her face so fast she looked like a corpse. It recorded everything? Kenneth whispered. The conversation last night? About the audit? Everything, I said. And the last 10 minutes? You admitting Maya signed without reading? You admitting the money is offshore? You admitting you want to bribe me to cover up a felony? Lydia stood up. Her legs were shaking. You bitch? You wired the RV? I secured the asset, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. I used to protect this country from enemies outside our borders. Lydia, now I have to protect myself from the enemies inside my own house. The line hit Dad hard. He slumped back against the seat cushion, covering his face with his hands. Lydia looked around the RV like a trapped animal. Her eyes were wild. She realized that her manipulation, her threats, her guilt trips, they weren't just failing. They were evidence. Every word she had just used to try and bury me was now a shovel digging her own grave. Give it to me. She lunged toward the dashboard. I stepped in her path. I didn't touch her. I just stood there, 5'9" of military-trained obstruction. Don't, I warned. That is tampering with evidence. And honestly, Lydia, I don't think you want to add assault to the list, not with that bruise on my face already logged. She stopped inches from me. She was breathing hard, her chest heaving. She looked at me with a hatred so pure it felt like radiation, but beneath the hate, there was terror. She couldn't breathe. The air in the RV was too thin for her lies now. She shoved past me, unlocking the door with fumbling fingers. I need air. I need to think. She threw the door open and stumbled out onto the metal steps, gasping for oxygen. I followed her to the doorway. Dad stayed inside, buried in his hands. Lydia stood on the gravel, clutching her chest, looking left and right as if searching for an escape route. The neighbors were gone. The campground was quiet. But then, the crunch of tires on gravel broke the silence. A black pickup truck rolled slowly down the campground lane. It wasn't a military vehicle. It had no government plates. It was a dusty Ford F-150 with a cracked bug shield. But I knew the driver. He wore aviator sunglasses and had an elbow resting casually out of the open window. He pulled the truck to a stop right in front of our site, blocking the exit for the RV. Lydia squinted at the truck, confused. The driver's door opened. Agent Cole Harrison stepped out. He was wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, looking for all the world like a man on a fishing trip. But the way he stood, feet shoulder-width apart, hands loose but ready, was pure federal agent. He took off his sunglasses and looked at Lydia, then up at me in the doorway. He saw the bruise on my face. His jaw tightened, just a fraction. "Morning," Cole said, his voice easy but carrying a weight that made the air stand still. "Nice day for a family trip, but I think you folks might have taken a wrong turn." Lydia took a step back, bumping into the RV. She looked at me, then at Cole, and the realization crashed over her. The trap hadn't just sprung inside the RV. It had closed around the entire campground. Cole Harrison was the kind of man who looked like he belonged everywhere and nowhere all at once. Officially, he was a contract oversight specialist for a civilian agency that reported to the Department of Defense. Unofficially, he was the guy they sent when the numbers didn't add up, and the people involved were too politically connected for a standard audit. We had history, 5 years ago, when a corrupt quartermaster tried to pin the disappearance of 40 night vision units on my login credentials. Cole was the one who dug through the server logs and found the real culprit. He saved my career. He saved my honor. Now, standing in the morning sun at the Whispering Pines campground, leaning against his dusty Ford truck, he was here to save my life. "Charlie," Cole said, pushing off the truck and walking toward us with a loose, easy gait. He ignored the tension radiating off Lydia like heat waves off asphalt. "Been a long time. I was passing through to Denver and saw the rig. Figured I would say hello." It was a lie. Of course, a beautiful, orchestrated lie. Lydia blinked, her social programming overriding her panic for a split second. She smoothed her cardigan, forcing a smile that looked like it was painted on glass. "Oh," she said, her voice high and brittle. "A friend of Charlie's? How lovely. We were just discussing breakfast." "I can see that," Cole said. His eyes flicked to the bruise on my cheek. He didn't stare, but the muscles in his jaw tightened. He looked at Kenneth, who was still hovering in the doorway of the RV, pale and sweating. "Mr. Ellison, good to see you again." "Agent Harrison," Dad managed to choke out. He looked terrified. He knew exactly who Cole was. For the next 20 minutes, Cole played the role of the casual acquaintance perfectly. He drank the coffee Lydia poured with shaking hands. He asked polite questions about the road trip. He watched Lydia flutter around, talking too loud, laughing too hard at jokes that weren't funny, trying desperately to normalize a situation that had gone nuclear. Every time she looked at me, there was a flicker of pure terror behind her eyes. But she kept pouring coffee, kept smiling, kept pretending that her stepdaughter didn't have a recording of her confessing to felonies. When we finally packed up to leave, Cole caught my eye. He tapped his phone against his leg. A signal. "Meet me at the rendezvous." The drive back to Brighton Falls was a tomb. Lydia didn't speak. She sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, her fingernails digging into the leather armrest. Dad drove like a robot, eyes fixed on the road, terrified to look at either of us. Maya sat in the back, sensing the disaster but not understanding the mechanics of it, scrolling through Instagram with headphones on to block out the silence. I didn't go home when we arrived. I told them I needed to check in at the office. Lydia didn't argue. She looked like she wanted me as far away from her as possible. I met Cole an hour later at a dive bar near the industrial park called the Rusty Anchor. It was dark, smelled of stale beer and lemon pledge, and was completely empty at 2 p.m. We sat in a booth in the back. I pulled a ruggedized, encrypted hard drive from my bag and slid it across the sticky table. "This is it," I said, my voice low. The Ironcrest logs, the bank routing numbers, the email traffic I mirrored, and the audio file from the RV. Cole took the drive, weighing it in his hand like a weapon. "The audio?" "Clear as a bell," I said. Lydia admitting that the shell companies are tax evasion vehicles, Dad admitting he knew, and Lydia explicitly stating that Maya signed the documents without reading them. Cole nodded, pocketing the drive. He took a sip of his iced tea, his expression grim. That matches what we have on our end. I frowned. Your end? I thought you were waiting for my data. We were, Cole said. But Northline Vector Systems isn't blind. Charlie, their internal compliance algorithms flagged Ellison Strategic Logistics as a high-risk vendor 3 weeks ago. Small inconsistencies in the subcontractor declarations. Nothing criminal on the face of it, but enough to trigger a yellow flag in the procurement database. My stomach dropped. Northline knew? They suspected, Cole corrected. They didn't have the smoking gun. You just handed me the ballistics report. He leaned in, his voice dropping. But there is something you need to know. Something that wasn't in the packet you sent me earlier. What? We ran a full background on the corporate officers for the associated entities, Cole said. Ironcrest isn't the only one. There are 2 others, Blue Water Holdings and Zenith Consulting. I didn't see those in the ledger, I said. They are newer, Cole said, registered in Nevada and Wyoming respectively, and the sole proprietor listed on the Articles of Incorporation for all 3 isn't Lydia, it isn't Kenneth. He looked at me, and his eyes were full of sympathy. It is Maya Ellison, he said. I felt the blood drain from my face. 3? 3, Cole confirmed. And here's the kicker. We pulled the IP logs for the digital signatures. The documents were signed from a computer with a MAC address registered to the Ellison main office. At times when Maya was verifiably documented as being in yoga class or at the movies. But legally, on paper, your 23-year-old sister is the CEO of a multi-million-dollar laundering ring. I slammed my fist on the table. She set her up. Lydia set her own daughter up as the fall guy. It is a classic insulation layer, Cole said calmly. If the feds come knocking, Lydia claims she was just an advisor, and Maya was the executive decision-maker. Maya goes to prison for 20 years. Lydia pleads ignorance and maybe gets a fine. I will kill her, I whispered. The rage was white-hot, different from the cold calculation I had felt in the RV. This wasn't about justice anymore. This was about protecting Maya. No, Cole said sharply. You will not. You will let me do my job. Listen to me. Charlie, from this moment on, you are not just a whistleblower. You are a material witness in a federal conspiracy case. You cannot talk to Lydia. You cannot talk to Kenneth. And as hard as it is, you cannot talk to Maya about the case. She doesn't know. Cole, she thinks she is just signing permission slips. If you tip her off, Lydia might panic and destroy evidence we haven't found yet, Cole warned. Or worse, she might coerce Maya into running. You have to hold the line. I nodded, swallowing the bitter taste of bile. Okay, what happens next? I take this to the U.S. attorney, Cole said. We get subpoenas. We freeze the assets. But before that happens, you have a problem closer to home. Northline, I guessed. They know you are involved, Cole said. Their legal team pinged me this morning. They want to know if their director of system security was using their proprietary software to hack a vendor. That is a liability nightmare for them. I checked my phone. I had 4 missed calls from the Northline General Counsel. Go handle it, Cole said. Tell them the truth, but don't tell them everything. I left the bar and drove straight to the Northline headquarters, a glass and steel fortress on the edge of town. My badge still worked, which was a good sign. But the moment I walked into the executive suite, the atmosphere was glacial. I was ushered into a conference room. The general counsel, a shark in a suit named Robert Sterling, was sitting at the head of the table. 2 members of the internal audit team were with him. Charlie, Sterling said, not standing up, we have some concerns. I assume this is about Ellison Strategic Logistics, I said, taking a seat without being asked. I set my phone on the table, screen down. We have reports that you have been conducting an unauthorized investigation into one of our vendors, Sterling said, his voice smooth and dangerous. Using Northline resources? False, I said immediately. I used my personal hardware. I used my own time. I utilized a legacy mirroring protocol on the Ellison server that I had administrative access to as a family member assisting with IT maintenance. No Northline code, servers, or bandwidth were touched. I slid a folder across the table. It contained affidavits of my equipment usage and a time-stamped log of my activities, proving total separation from the Northline grid. Sterling opened the folder, scanning the pages. He looked relieved, but still wary. Even so, Charlie, you are investigating your father's company. Conflict of interest doesn't even begin to cover it. It is not a conflict of interest, I said. It is risk mitigation. I found evidence that Ellison Strategic Logistics is defrauding the government. If Northline continues to do business with them, we become accessories. We risk our own federal contracts. I am not acting as a daughter today. Robert, I am acting as your security director protecting this firm from a radioactive partner. Sterling stopped reading. He looked at the audit team. They exchanged nervous glances. How bad is it? Sterling asked. Federal indictment bad, I said. Agent Harrison has the files. If I were you, I would sever the connection immediately, invoke the compliance clause in the contract, and freeze all pending payments to Ellison. Today, Sterling was quiet for a long moment. He was a businessman, and he knew a sinking ship when he saw one. Draft the notice, Sterling said to the auditor on his right. Suspend the vendor status of Ellison Strategic Logistics, effective immediately pending a compliance review. He looked back at me. You are on administrative leave. Charlie, paid. Until this blows over. We can't have you in the building while your family is being indicted. Understood, I said. I walked out of the building feeling lighter, but the war wasn't over. It was just shifting fronts. 2 hours later, across town at the Ellison offices, a notification pinged on Lydia's desktop. It was an automated email from the Northline vendor management system. Notice of contract suspension. Compliance violation. I wasn't there to see it, but I could imagine the scene. Lydia, sitting in her plush leather chair, reading the words that signaled the end of her cash flow. She would know instantly who did it. She would know that my threat in the RV wasn't empty. She wouldn't pack a bag. She wouldn't run. That wasn't Lydia's style. When Lydia was cornered, she didn't flee. She attacked. She picked up her phone and dialed a number. It wasn't a lawyer. It was a man she had used before for sensitive IT issues, a black hat contractor who operated out of a basement in Denver. It is me, Lydia said, her voice shaking with rage. I have a job. I need you to access the Ellison server. I need you to plant a file, and I need you to make it look like it came from an IP address registered to Charlie Ellison. What kind of file? The voice on the other end asked. Ransomware, Lydia said, her eyes fixed on the screen where the suspension notice glowed. I want it to look like she hacked us. I want it to look like she is trying to extort her own father. If she wants to be a whistleblower, let's see how she likes being a defendant. I thought I had stripped Lydia of her weapons when I exposed the offshore accounts. I was wrong. I had taken away her shield. But I had forgotten that a cornered animal is most dangerous when it has nothing left to lose. Lydia didn't just want to defend herself. She wanted to decapitate the threat. And in her narrative, the threat was me. It started 48 hours after the confrontation at the campground. I was sitting in a temporary workspace Cole had set up in a nondescript office park, reviewing the decrypted Ironcrest files, when my phone exploded with notifications. My Northline corporate email access, revoked. My VPN credentials, terminated. My security clearance status, flagged for immediate review. Before I could process the cascade of red alerts on my screen, Cole walked in. He didn't look like the casual fisherman from the campsite anymore. He looked like a federal agent who had just been handed a live grenade. We have a problem, Cole said, tossing a folder onto the desk. A big one. An anonymous tip just landed in the inbox of the Northline Ethics Board and the local FBI Cyber Division. It claims you didn't audit Ellison Strategic Logistics. It claims you hacked them. I opened the folder. Inside were printouts of server logs. My stomach turned over as I scanned the lines. There were login attempts, dozens of them, all time-stamped from last night, originating from an IP address that I recognized immediately. It was the static IP of my apartment router. "This is a frame-up," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline spiking in my blood. "Lydia hired someone. She is trying to paint this as corporate espionage. She wants to make it look like I held the data hostage for blackmail." "I know," Cole said, pointing to a highlighted line of code in the log. "Look at the intrusion method. It is a brute force script using a dictionary attack. It is clumsy. It is loud. It is the kind of thing a teenager in a basement does." "Exactly," I said. "I have the admin keys. Cole, Dad gave them to me 3 years ago. Why would I try to batter down a door I have the key to? And why would I do it from my own home IP without even routing through a proxy? It is insulting." "It is insulting to you," Cole corrected, "but to a jury that doesn't understand cybersecurity? To a judge who thinks hacker equals magic? It looks damning, and right now, it is enough to muddy the waters." The legal meeting that afternoon was a nightmare. I sat at a long mahogany table in a conference room that smelled of lemon polish and expensive cologne. Across from me sat Robert Sterling, the Northline General Counsel, and 2 men from Army Criminal Investigation who looked at me like I was a contagion. "Ms. Ellison," Sterling began, sliding the fabricated logs toward me. "These records suggest you deployed a ransomware packet into the Ellison mainframe. The text file attached to the payload demands $2 million in untraceable cryptocurrency to prevent a data leak." "I didn't write that," I said, keeping my hands visible on the table. "That is a fabrication. The timestamps align with a period when I was physically with Agent Harrison reviewing evidence." "Can you prove you weren't running a remote script?" one of the Army investigators asked. "Automation is the hallmark of your profession, isn't it?" I felt the walls closing in. Lydia had played a smart card. By accusing me of a crime, she invalidated my status as a whistleblower. If I was a criminal trying to extort the company, then the evidence I found became fruit of the poisonous tree. She wasn't just trying to fire me, she was trying to delete my credibility. Cole stood up from the corner of the room. "Gentlemen, if you look at the metadata of the so-called ransomware note, you will see it was written in a text editor that defaults to Cyrillic encoding. Charlie Ellison hasn't used a default editor since she was 12, and the script used to plant it? It is a copy-paste job from a hacker forum that has been patched for 5 years. You are looking at a forgery, a bad one." Sterling looked at Cole, then at me. "Forgery or not, Charlie, until this is cleared, you are a liability. We are suspending you without pay, and we are advising you to retain criminal defense counsel." I walked out of that building feeling like I was walking through water. Lydia had managed to turn the tables. She had money, she had connections, and she had a total lack of moral boundaries. Then my personal phone rang. It was Maya. I almost didn't answer. Cole had warned me about contact, but the ringtone, a silly pop song she had set for herself years ago, broke my heart. I answered. "Charlie?" Her voice was small, trembling. She sounded like she was hiding in a closet. "Maya, I can't talk to you about the case," I said quickly. "You know that." I know, she sobbed. "But I had to tell you. She made me sign it." I froze on the sidewalk. "Sign what, Maya?" "A statement," Maya cried. "Mom, Lydia. She brought a lawyer to the house this morning. They had a paper. It says that I saw you on my computer. It says I saw you installing the virus. She said if I didn't sign it, the police would take the house. She said Dad would die in prison, and it would be my fault." My hand gripped the phone so hard the plastic creaked. "Did you sign it, Maya?" I signed it," she whispered. "But I didn't turn it in yet. She gave it to me to take to the notary this afternoon. I am sitting in my car. Charlie, I can't do it. I can't lie for her anymore. But I am scared." "Where are you?" I asked. "I am in the parking lot of the UPS store on 4th Street, she said. "She is texting me every 2 minutes asking for the receipt." "Stay there," I said. "Do not go in. Do not move." I hung up and looked at Cole. He had heard my side of the conversation. "She has a witness statement from Maya," I said. "Coerced. If that paper enters the legal system, it is over. It becomes a he said, she said between sisters. And the jury will see a crying 23-year-old girl versus a cold, professional hacker." "We can't just take the paper," Cole said, his mind working fast. "If we take it, Lydia claims you intimidated the witness. We need proof of the coercion. We need Lydia to say the quiet part out loud." "How?" I asked. Cole looked at me, his eyes hard. "We use Maya. We need her to get Lydia on a call, a video call, and we need to record it." It was a gamble. Maya wasn't an operator. She was a kid who liked yoga and oat milk lattes. Asking her to wear a wire, even a digital one, was dangerous, but we had no choice. I met Maya in the back of Cole's truck, 3 blocks from the notary. She was shaking, her mascara running down her cheeks. "I can't do it," she said, hyperventilating. "She will know. She always knows when I'm lying." "She doesn't know you are lying right now," I said, holding her hands. "She thinks she owns you. That is her blind spot. She thinks you are too weak to fight back. Show her she is wrong." We set it up. Maya would sit in her car. Cole rigged a screen capture and audio tap on her phone. I sat in the back seat, out of frame, silent as a grave. Maya dialed Lydia on Zoom. It rang once. Lydia's face filled the screen. She looked impeccable, sitting in her home office, but her eyes were manic. "Maya?" Lydia snapped. "Where are you? Did you get the stamp?" Maya took a deep breath. She looked at the camera, her voice wobbling perfectly. "Mom, I am at the store, but I read the paper again. It says I saw Charlie typing code. I didn't see that. I was in the kitchen." "It doesn't matter where you were," Lydia hissed. "Just get the damn stamp, Maya." "But it is a lie," Maya said, tears welling up again. "If I sign this, and they find out, that is perjury, isn't it? I could go to jail." "You are not going to jail," Lydia shouted. She leaned into the camera, her face contorted. "Listen to me, you stupid girl. Charlie is the one going to jail. We are doing this to save the family. Do you want to be homeless? Do you want to lose your car? Your trust fund?" "I just don't want to lie," Maya whimpered. "Why can't we just tell the truth?" Lydia let out a frustrated scream. "Because the truth ruins us. Just sign the paper. If anyone asks, you say exactly what we rehearsed. You are the innocent victim who was used by her brilliant, evil sister. People will believe you. They will see you just followed orders, and she is the one who used her skills to destroy the company. She is the weapon. Maya, you are just the collateral. Now sign it." Cole, monitoring the feed from the front seat, gave a thumbs up. I closed my eyes, letting out a breath I didn't know I was holding. She is the one who used her skills to destroy the company. It wasn't a confession of the fraud, but it was a confession of the frame-up. She had just admitted that the narrative of me being the hacker was a construction to save themselves. Maya looked at the screen, her face hardening. "No," she said. "What did you say?" Lydia asked, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I said no," Maya said. "I am not signing it, and I am not coming home." She ended the call. For a second, there was silence in the car. Then Maya turned around and looked at me. She burst into tears, but this time, they were tears of relief. I climbed into the front seat. Cole was already saving the file, creating 3 backups. "That is it," Cole said. "That is the nail in the coffin, witness tampering, obstruction of justice, and a tacit admission that the hacking allegations are false." He looked at me. "I am sending this to the U.S. Attorney immediately, with this, the fabricated logs, and the original audio from the RV. We have enough." "Enough for what?" I asked. "Enough to take the gloves off," Cole said. "The Department of Justice just approved the Title III warrants, wiretaps, financial surveillance, everything, as of 5 minutes ago. Lydia Ellison isn't just a suspect in a fraud case. She is the target of a federal racketeering investigation." I looked out the window at the mundane street corner. The people walking by with their coffees and their dogs, completely unaware that a family was imploding a few feet away. Lydia had tried to turn me into a criminal. Instead, she had just handed the government the key to her own cell, and the person who turned it wasn't the soldier she feared. It was the daughter she thought she could control. "Take Maya to the safe house," I told Cole. "Lydia is going to realize what happened in about 10 minutes, and when she does, she's going to scorch the earth." "We are already moving," Cole said, putting the truck in gear. "The game has changed, Charlie. It is not hide and seek anymore. It is capture the flag." The irony was heavy enough to choke on. The nightmare had started in a rented recreational vehicle on the interstate, and now I was driving another one straight into the jaws of the beast to finish it. I steered the 30-foot coachman through the rusted chain-link gates of the old transport yard on the outskirts of the city. It was a graveyard for heavy machinery, a place where trucks went to die and where desperate people went to make deals they couldn't walk away from. The sun was setting, casting long, jagged shadows across the rows of cannibalized semi-trucks and shipping containers. My hands were steady on the wheel. This wasn't a family trip. This was a tactical insertion. According to the wiretap Cole had authorized 3 hours ago, Lydia had panicked. She knew the Northline contract was gone. She knew the walls were closing in. So she had called Grant Ellery, the procurement officer at the nearby base, who had been rubber-stamping her phantom inventory for 5 years. She told him she had the master drive, the physical backup of every inflated invoice and kickback scheme, and she was willing to trade it for a clean exit. She didn't know that I was the one bringing the drive. I parked the RV next to a rusted-out shipping container that had been converted into a makeshift site office. Lydia's own vehicle, the sleek black SUV she had bought with stolen money, was already parked there. Next to it was a government-issue sedan with civilian plates. I killed the engine. I checked the specialized recording equipment taped to my chest beneath my jacket. I checked the burner phone in my pocket. "We are in position." Cole's voice crackled in my earpiece, tiny and invisible. "Perimeter is set. Do not let them leave that container. Charlie, get the admission, then drop the hammer." "Copy," I whispered. I stepped out of the RV, clutching a ruggedized hard drive case. The gravel crunched loudly under my boots. It was the only sound in the dead yard. I walked to the metal door of the container and pushed it open. The air inside was stale, smelling of old tobacco and industrial grease. A single fluorescent strip light flickered overhead, casting a sickly green pallor on the 3 people sitting around a scarred metal table. Lydia looked up. She looked like she hadn't slept in a week. Her eyes were sunken, her makeup smudged, but her posture was still rigid, still trying to project authority she no longer possessed. Kenneth sat next to her, staring at his hands. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him, a man deflated by the weight of his own cowardice. Across from them sat Grant Ellery. He was a thick-set man with a buzz cut, and the arrogant, bored expression of someone who believed his rank made him untouchable. "You are late," Lydia snapped, her voice raspy. "Give me the drive." I walked to the table but didn't hand it over. I placed the case in the center, keeping my hand on it. "Hello, Grant," I said. "Long time. I think the last time I saw you was at the company Christmas party. You were bragging about your new boat." Grant didn't smile. He looked at the case, then at me. "Cut the chatter. Does that drive contain the unredacted inventory logs for the last 5 years? Specifically the Ironcrest and Blue Water accounts?" "It does," I said. "Every serial number, every timestamp, every dollar that went into your Cayman account instead of buying body armor for troops." Grant nodded, satisfied. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick envelope. "Here's the deal. I have access to the base server archives. I can corrupt the file headers for the original purchase orders, make them unreadable. Data corruption due to server migration. It happens all the time. Without those original POs, the investigation hits a wall. They can't prove intent." "And the money?" Lydia asked, her eyes greedy. "The cash reserve?" "It is in the trunk of my car," Grant said. $500,000, Unmarked. Enough to get you to a non-extradition country if you leave tonight. Deal, Lydia said. She reached for the hard drive. I pulled it back. Wait, I said. I have a question. Lydia glared at me. Charlie, give him the drive. This is the only way we survive. Do you want your father to die in jail? I want to know who takes the fall, I said, looking from Grant to Lydia. If Grant corrupts the files, the investigation doesn't just stop. They will look for a scapegoat. Someone had to sign off on the system maintenance that caused the corruption. Someone had to authorize the transfers. Grant shrugged. We pin it on the external IT contractor. You? I looked at him, feigning shock. Me? It fits, Lydia said quickly, leaning forward. We stick to the story. You hacked the system. You corrupted the files to cover your tracks after your blackmail attempt failed. We are the victims of a rogue employee. So that is it, I said, my voice rising just enough for the microphone taped to my chest to catch the reverberation in the metal room. I go to federal prison for 20 years for cyber-terrorism, and you two take $500,000 and retire to a beach? You were born to carry the weight, Charlie. Lydia spat the words out, her face twisting into a sneer. That is why your father kept your name on the legacy contracts. That is why we used your login credentials for the initial setup. You have always been the soldier, right? Taking bullets is what you do. You sacrifice so the family survives. I looked at my father. He was trembling. Dad? I asked softly. Is that true? Was I just an insurance policy to you? Born to be the fall guy? Kenneth looked up. His eyes met mine. And for the first time, I saw the dam breaking. He looked at Lydia, at the greed and the malice etched into her face. He looked at Grant, the corrupt official treating his life like a line item. No, Kenneth whispered. Shut up, Kenneth, Lydia hissed. No, Kenneth shouted, slamming his fist on the metal table. He stood up, knocking his chair back. I won't do it. I won't let you put this on her. Sit down, Grant barked, reaching for his hip, where I guessed he had a concealed weapon. She didn't start the vendor scheme, Kenneth yelled, pointing a shaking finger at Lydia. You did. You came to me in 2008. You said the company was going under. You brought me the Ironcrest paperwork. You told me it was a temporary fix. You set up the accounts. I only signed them because I was afraid of losing you. Kenneth, stop talking, Lydia shrieked, lunging at him. She made me do it, Kenneth was screaming now, confessing to the empty air, confessing to God, confessing to the wire he didn't know I was wearing. She falsified the Maya Ellison signatures. She bribed Grant. I have the emails. Lydia, I saved them all. The silence that followed was deafening. Grant Ellery looked like he had just swallowed glass. Lydia stood frozen, her hand half raised to strike my father. Well, I said calmly, I think that covers everything. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I unlocked it and placed it face up on the table. The screen was bright in the dim room. It showed a voice recording app, the waveform dancing in red, capturing every panicked breath. You recorded this, Lydia whispered, staring at the phone. Not just this, I said. The last 10 minutes, the bribe, the plan to frame me, Dad's confession. It is all streaming to a cloud server right now. Lydia's face went blank. Then, the mask shattered completely. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She launched herself across the table. She wasn't going for me. She was going for the phone. She scrambled over the metal surface, knocking the hard drive case to the floor. She grabbed the phone, her fingernails scratching against the glass. Delete it, she screamed, her voice a guttural animal noise. Delete it now. She fumbled with the screen, her hands shaking so violently she couldn't hit the buttons. She raised the phone to smash it against the table edge. It doesn't matter. Lydia, I yelled over her screaming. That is just the display. The microphone is in the ceiling. She froze, phone raised in midair. She looked up at the flickering fluorescent light. At that exact second, the world exploded. Boom, boom. 2 flashbang grenades detonated outside the container door, turning the twilight into blinding white noon. The metal walls rang like a bell. "Federal agents, drop it! Get on the ground!" The door flew open. A tactical team in heavy armor poured into the cramped space, weapons raised, laser sights cutting through the smoke. Grant Ellery knew the drill. He dropped to his knees instantly, hands behind his head. Kenneth collapsed back into his chair, sobbing, his hands covering his face. But Lydia stood there. She held my phone like a talisman, looking from the lasers on her chest to me. Cole Harrison stepped through the doorway, his gun drawn but lowered. He looked at the scene, the corrupted official, the broken father, and the stepmother who had turned a family into a crime syndicate. "Lydia Ellison," Cole's voice was calm, authoritative, cutting through the ringing in my ears. "Drop the device. Put your hands where I can see them. You are under arrest for conspiracy to defraud the United States government, wire fraud, and witness tampering." Lydia looked at me one last time. There was no mother left in her eyes, no CFO, just a ruin. She dropped the phone. It hit the metal floor with a crack, but it didn't break. "I hate you," she mouthed silently at me. I looked at her, at the woman who had beaten me in an RV bathroom 200 miles ago, thinking she could beat the truth out of me. "I know," I said, "but you are going to hate prison more." An agent moved in, spinning her around and zip-tying her wrists. Another agent secured Grant. A third moved toward my father. I watched as they cuffed Dad. He didn't fight. He looked up at me as they pulled him to his feet. "Charlie," he croaked, "I am sorry." I stood still as the chaos swirled around me. The container felt smaller than the RV bathroom had, but this time, I wasn't the one trapped. "Check the trunk of the sedan," I told Cole as he walked past me. "Grant said there is $500,000 in cash." "We will get it," Cole said. He put a hand on my shoulder. "You done good. Charlie, go outside. Get some air." I walked out of the container into the cool night air. The yard was lit up by red and blue flashing lights. I saw them leading Lydia toward a waiting van. She was thrashing, screaming something about her lawyer, about her rights. I leaned against the side of the rented RV and took a deep breath. The air smelled of diesel and dust, but to me, it smelled like the end of a very long, very dark road. The physical violence was over. The legal violence was just beginning, and I was the one holding the match. The flashing red and blue lights of the tactical cruisers reflected off the rusted chrome of the dead semi-trucks, turning the scrapyard into a disorienting strobe of violence and justice. The air was thick with the smell of exhaust and the sharp, coppery scent of adrenaline. I stood near the wheel well of the rented coachman, my arms wrapped tight around my chest, shivering not from the cold, but from the massive crash of adrenaline leaving my system. They took Grant Ellery first. The arrogant procurement officer who had treated federal contracts like his personal piggy bank was face down in the dirt, gravel pressed into his cheek. An agent with FBI stenciled in yellow across his back kneeled on Grant's spine, pulling his wrists together with a mechanical efficiency that offered no pity. "Grant Ellery," the agent's voice boomed, echoing off the corrugated metal of the shipping container. "You are under arrest for bribery of a public official, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and falsification of government records. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The plastic zip ties cinched tight with a sound like a zipper closing on a body bag. "Zzzt," Grant grunted, a pathetic, winded sound. He tried to turn his head, tried to find someone to bargain with, but there was no one left. The authority he had worn like a uniform for 20 years had evaporated the moment the flashbangs went off. Then, they moved on Lydia. She wasn't going quietly. 2 female agents had to drag her out of the container. She was kicking, her expensive boots scraping uselessly against the metal threshold. Her hair, usually sprayed into an indestructible helmet of perfection, was wild and falling across her face. "Get off me!" she screamed, her voice shredding in the night air. "You cannot do this. Do you know who my husband is? Do you know who I am?" They ignored her. They spun her around and pressed her against the side of the container, hard enough to make the metal boom. Lydia twisted her neck, her eyes scanning the yard frantically until they locked onto me. "Charlie!" she shrieked. It wasn't a call for help. It was an accusation. "Look at what you did. Look at this." I didn't look away. I couldn't. "You destroyed us," she spat, saliva flying from her mouth. "You destroyed your own family. Are you happy now, you traitor? You ungrateful, miserable little snake." The agent tightened the cuffs on her wrists. Lydia winced, but the pain only seemed to fuel her rage. "Maya will never forgive you," Lydia screamed, dragging my sister's name into the filth of the scrapyard like a weapon. "She will hate you for the rest of her life. You put her mother in prison. You think you are protecting her? You just made her an orphan, you bitch." The words hit me like physical blows. My knees felt weak. For a second, the doubt flared up. The ingrained guilt of a daughter raised to keep the peace, to swallow the poison so the family dinner didn't get ruined. But then I felt the throb in my cheek, the bruise, the physical memory of the RV bathroom. I took a step forward. My hands were trembling, but my feet were planted in the gravel. "When you hit me," I said, my voice quiet at first, lost under the sirens, I raised it, projecting it with the command voice I had learned on the tarmac. "When you hit me in that RV bathroom, Lydia, did you think about Maya then?" Lydia stopped struggling. She froze, her chest heaving against the cold metal wall. "Did you think about her when you forged her signature?" I asked, walking closer until I was just outside the perimeter the agents had established. "Did you think about her when you set her up to take the fall for a federal crime? Or was family just a convenient excuse you used to keep us all in line?" Lydia stared at me. Her mouth opened, then closed. For the first time in my life, I saw her voiceless. The narrative she had spun for years, that she did everything for us, for the legacy, crumbled under the weight of that single, simple question. She realized I wasn't buying the lie anymore, and without the lie, she was just a thief in handcuffs. "Move her," the agent ordered. They hauled her away from the wall, marching her toward the waiting transport van. Then it was Dad's turn. Kenneth Ellison walked out of the container under his own power, flanked by Cole. He wasn't fighting. He wasn't screaming. He looked like a ghost, his skin the color of old parchment in the flashing lights. He held his hands out in front of him, wrists together, waiting for the metal bracelets. I watched the cuffs click onto my father's wrists. The sound was quieter than it had been for the others, but it echoed louder in my head. This was the man who taught me to ride a bike. This was the man who had sat by my bed when I had the chicken pox. And this was the man who had sold me out for a quiet life. As they led him past me, he stopped. The agent nudged him to keep moving. But Cole held up a hand, allowing him a brief second. Kenneth looked at me. His eyes were red, rimmed with tears that hadn't fallen yet. He tried to smile, a grotesque, wobbling grimace that broke my heart. "I am sorry, Charlie," he whispered. His voice was cracked, dry as dust. I read the note. In the bathroom, 200 miles ago. The confession hung in the air between us. He wasn't just apologizing for the fraud. He was admitting to the betrayal. He was admitting that he had held my blood-stained plea in his hand, read the ultimatum, and chosen to put it back in his wallet and keep driving. He had chosen Lydia. He had chosen the lie. I looked at him. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to hug him. I wanted to ask him why I wasn't enough to make him brave. But I didn't do any of that. I just nodded, a single, sharp inclination of my chin. It wasn't forgiveness. Forgiveness implies that things can go back to how they were. This was an acknowledgement. I was acknowledging the truth he had finally spoken. "I know, Dad," I said softly. He dropped his head, his shoulders shaking, and let the agents lead him away. Cole walked over to me. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes deep in the harsh lighting. "You okay?" he asked. "No," I said. "Do you want to leave?" He gestured to his truck. "I can have an officer drive you out of here. You don't need to watch the rest of this. We have the recording. We have the drive. Your job is done." I looked at the transport van. Lydia was being loaded into the back. Dad was waiting in line. "No," I said. "I am staying." "Charlie." "I need to see it." "Cole," I said. "I need to see the doors close. If I don't watch it happen, 10 years from now, I am going to wonder if I imagined it." Cole nodded, understanding. "All right, stand fast." I watched as they shoved Lydia into the back of the armored van. She stumbled, catching herself on the doorframe. Before the agent could push her inside, she twisted around. Her eyes found me again. The manic rage was gone, replaced by a chilling, razor-sharp clarity. She looked at me with a profound pity, as if I were the one in cuffs. "You think this makes you righteous?" she called out, her voice carrying over the idling engines. "You think the law will love you more than your family did? You are going to be alone. Charlie, cold and alone." It was her final attempt to plant a seed of doubt, a final toxin injected into my bloodstream. I looked at her, standing there in the ruin of her own making, and I felt nothing but a vast, empty calm. "The law doesn't love anyone, Lydia," I replied, my voice steady. "It doesn't care about us. It just records what we do, and that is all I ever wanted, an accurate record." The agent shoved her inside. The heavy metal doors slammed shut with a finality that felt like a guillotine dropping. I watched the van pull away, its taillights dissolving into the darkness of the salvage yard. The sirens faded. The tactical team began to pack up their gear. The flashbang smoke drifted away on the night breeze. Silence returned to the yard, heavier than before. I turned around and looked at the RV I had rented. It was a different model than the one we had taken on the trip. Newer, cleaner, but the shape was the same. The white aluminum siding, the narrow door, the flimsy steps. I walked up the stairs and into the cabin. It was dark inside, lit only by the ambient light from the yard filtering through the blinds. I walked past the kitchenette, past the driver's seat where I had sat sweating and terrified an hour ago. I walked to the back and opened the bathroom door. It was almost identical to the other one. The same cramped dimensions, the same cheap linoleum, the same smell of chemical disinfectant. I stepped inside and closed the door. I looked at myself in the mirror. In the dim light, my face looked ghostly. The bruise on my cheek was changing color now, shifting from purple to a sickly yellow-green at the edges. It was healing. The body knows how to repair itself, even when the mind is still bleeding. I reached out and touched the glass, right where my reflection stared back at me. Then, I turned to the toilet. I knelt down, my knees popping, and found the plastic access panel on the wall behind the water line. It was the same make, the same design. I pried it open with my fingernails. It popped off with a hollow snap. I looked into the dark cavity behind the wall. There were pipes, there were wires, there was dust. But it was empty. There was no note, no blood-stained receipt, no plea for help. The secret wasn't hidden in the walls anymore. It wasn't festering in the dark, waiting to be found by a coward who would bury it again. It was out. It was on a hard drive in Cole's pocket. It was on a cloud server in Iceland. It was on the lips of federal prosecutors who were drafting the indictments right now. I snapped the panel back into place. "No more room for pretending," I whispered to the empty room. I stood up and washed my hands. I scrubbed them hard, even though they weren't dirty. I washed away the feeling of the steering wheel, the feeling of the hard drive case, the feeling of my father's hand on my shoulder. I dried my hands on my jeans and opened the door. I stepped out of the RV and down the metal stairs, my boots crunching on the gravel. I closed the door behind me and locked it. I wasn't the daughter who kept secrets anymore. I wasn't the peacekeeper. I wasn't the victim who slipped notes behind toilets. I was the witness. I walked toward Cole, who was waiting by his truck. I didn't look back at the RV. I didn't look back at the empty space where the prisoner transport had been. I looked at the road leading out of the yard, the road that led back to the city, to the grand jury, to the witness stand. It was going to be a long road. It was going to be lonely, just like Lydia said, but for the first time in years, the ground under my feet felt solid. It was a bridge that would hold my weight. The federal courthouse in Silverford was designed to make you feel small. The ceilings were too high, the marble floors were too cold, and the silence was heavy enough to crush a person. I walked down the center aisle of courtroom 4 not as a soldier, and not as the tech-savvy whistleblower in a hoodie. I wore a simple charcoal suit, tailored and sharp. It was the uniform of someone who belonged to neither world anymore. I was no longer the obedient daughter, and I was no longer the victim. I was the witness. The trial had dragged on for 3 weeks, a slow-motion dissection of the Ellison family legacy. But today was the end. Today was the closing argument, built on a foundation of digital logs and recorded betrayals. I took my seat behind the prosecution table next to the assistant U.S. attorney, on the other side of the aisle. Lydia sat. The transformation was terrifying. The woman who had ruled our lives with a terrifying, manic energy was gone. In her place sat a hollow shell. Her hair was dull, pulled back in a severe bun. Her prison-issue blouse hung loosely on her frame. She didn't look at me. She stared at a spot on the table, her eyes empty, like a house where the lights had been cut off. The prosecutor stood up and pressed a button on the laptop. My voice filled the courtroom, amplified by the high-end speakers. It was the recording from the RV, the one taken just minutes before the tactical team breached the container. If Grant corrupts the files, the investigation doesn't just stop. They will look for a scapegoat. Then Lydia's voice, sharp and venomous, echoed off the mahogany walls. You were born to carry the weight. Charlie, that is why your father kept your name on the legacy contracts. The jury, 12 strangers who had spent the last month learning the intimate details of my trauma, looked at Lydia. There was no sympathy in their eyes. There was only disgust. Lydia's defense attorney, a man with a suit that cost more than my first car, tried to stand up and object, but he sank back down. There is no objection to a confession recorded in high definition. When it was my turn to take the stand, the defense attorney tried to salvage what he could. He paced in front of me, trying to paint a picture of a vindictive stepdaughter. Ms. Ellison, he said, leaning on the podium, is it not true that you and your stepmother had a contentious relationship for years? That you resented her for marrying your father? We were not close, I said evenly. And this incident in the RV bathroom, he continued, waving a hand dismissively. You claim she struck you, but isn't it possible that this was just a heated family argument that got out of hand? A mutual altercation that you are now exaggerating to destroy her? I looked at him. Then I looked at the jury. She hit me, I said, my voice calm, devoid of the tremor that used to be there. She slammed my head against a porcelain sink. I bled, but that wasn't the violence that brought me here today. I paused, letting the silence stretch. The real violence wasn't the punch, I continued. The real violence was using my identity, and my sister's identity, to steal from the country I swore to protect. The bruise on my face healed in 2 weeks. The fraud she committed in my name would have destroyed my life forever. That is not a family argument. That is a crime. The lawyer sat down. He knew he had lost. Then came Maya. My sister walked to the stand looking like she might shatter if someone spoke too loudly. She had been granted full immunity in exchange for her testimony. She sat in the chair, her hands gripping the edges of the wood, tears streaming down her face before she even spoke. Did you sign the incorporation documents for Ironcrest Distribution? The prosecutor asked gently. Yes, Maya whispered. Did you know what they were? No, Maya sobbed. Mom, Lydia, she told me they were just tax forms. She told me I had to sign them to help Dad. She said if I didn't sign them, the company would fail. And the affidavit? The prosecutor asked. The one accusing Charlie of hacking? She wrote it, Maya said, her voice shaking. She forced me to take it to the notary. She told me that if I didn't blame Charlie, we would all go to jail. She was going to sacrifice Charlie to save herself. Lydia finally looked up. She looked at her daughter, and for a second, I saw a flicker of pain. But it wasn't the pain of a mother. It was the pain of an architect watching her building collapse. Finally, they called Kenneth Ellison. My father looked 10 years older than he had in the RV. He moved slowly. His posture stooped. He had pleaded guilty to a lesser charge of conspiracy in exchange for testimony against Grant Ellery and Lydia. "Mr. Ellison," the prosecutor said, "when did you know about the fraud?" "From the beginning," Dad said softly. "I knew." "And when your daughter, Charlie, confronted you? When she left the note?" Dad looked at me. His eyes were wet. "She gave me a chance," he said to the room, but he was speaking to me. "She left a note in the bathroom, 200 miles before the arrest. She told me to choose. She told me to stop." "And what did you do?" "I hid the note," Dad said, a single tear tracking through the stubble on his cheek. "I was a coward. I let her take the risk because I was too afraid to face my wife. Charlie didn't betray us. She tried to save us. I was just too weak to grab the rope." The verdict came back in 4 hours. Guilty, on all counts. Lydia Ellison, guilty of wire fraud, money laundering, bribery, and witness tampering. Grant Ellery, guilty of bribery and corruption. Kenneth Ellison, guilty of conspiracy. Lydia didn't scream this time. She didn't fight. She stood there as the judge read the sentence, her face a mask of stone. She was looking at a minimum of 15 years in federal prison. The Ellison legacy she had fought so dirty to protect was now just a case number in a criminal archive. After the court adjourned, before they transported her to the holding facility, Lydia's lawyer approached Cole. "She wants to speak to Charlie," he said. 5 minutes, supervised. Cole looked at me. "You don't have to do this, Charlie." "I know," I said, "but I want to." We met in a small interview room off the main holding cells. Lydia was sitting at a metal table, her hands cuffed to the bar in the center. Cole stood by the door, arms crossed. I sat down opposite her. She looked at me, her eyes searching my face, looking for the bruise, looking for the fear. She found neither. "You won," she said, her voice flat. "Nobody won. Lydia," I said. "The company is gone. The house is seized. Dad is going to prison for 3 years. You are going away for 15 years. This isn't a victory. It is a demolition." She leaned forward as much as the cuffs would allow. "I have one question. If you could go back to that night in the RV, if you were back in that bathroom, bleeding into the sink, would you do it differently?" I looked at her. I thought about the fear. I thought about the trembling hand writing on the receipt. I thought about the hope I had held on to that my father would do the right thing. "Yes," I said. Lydia's eyes flickered with surprise. "You would?" "I would have done one thing differently," I said, my voice hard as iron. "I wouldn't have hidden the note behind the panel. I would have taped it right to the mirror. I would have forced Dad to look at it the second he walked in. I gave him too much room to hide. I gave you all too much room to pretend." Lydia stared at me. She was looking for regret, but all she found was resolve. "You are cold, Charlie," she whispered. "I learned from the best," I said. I stood up and walked to the door. I didn't look back. I didn't say goodbye. There was nothing left to say. 2 weeks later, I stood in the hallway of my new apartment. It was small, much smaller than the house I grew up in, but it was mine. It was on the 3rd floor of a quiet building in Denver, far away from Brighton Falls, far away from the memories of the company. I held a screwdriver in my hand. I was installing a new deadbolt. The landlord had provided a lock, of course, but I didn't trust it. I had bought a heavy-duty, high-security cylinder, the kind that couldn't be picked, the kind that couldn't be bumped. I tightened the last screw, the metal biting into the wood with a satisfying resistance. I tested the mechanism. The bolt slid home with a solid, heavy thud. Thunk! It was the sound of safety. I walked to the kitchen table. There was a single envelope sitting there. It had a prison return address. The handwriting was messy. Dad's handwriting. I looked at it for a long time. I knew what was inside. More apologies, more explanations, maybe a plea for me to visit him, to help him process the wreckage of his life. I reached out and picked up the envelope. It felt light. I didn't open it. I walked to the junk drawer in the kitchen, the one where I kept the spare batteries and the takeout menus. I dropped the unopened letter inside and slid the drawer shut. I wasn't angry anymore, but I was done. I had spent my whole life trying to open doors for my family, trying to be the bridge, trying to be the fixer. I walked back to the front door. I stepped out into the hallway to check the mail, then stepped back inside. I closed the door. I turned the thumb turn on the new lock. Click. The sound echoed in the empty apartment. It was sharp. It was final. It was the sound of a story ending and a life beginning. I was alone in the quiet, and for the first time in 29 years, the silence didn't feel like a threat. It felt like peace. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let me know your country or city so we can connect. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and smash that hype button so more people can hear this story.